Welcome to the What Now Festival this year, which is a festival that reimagines itself as a public residency. So a very different formulation of what a festival could be. 20 artists have been living and working here for the past few days. So it's a part domestic space, part workspace. We have 4 speakers that have been coming in over these days. We've had the public meal, which many of you have been at this evening. So yeah, it's been a really full day, and I'm really pleased this evening to be supported by Kirsty Alexander, who works with me at Independent Dance on the Creative Practice MA, and she's going to be introducing tonight's speaker.
Thank you. I'm not going to say very much. I'm just going to say I was very excited when Frank told me that he'd invited Joris to speak this evening. I gave a spontaneous whoop of delight because I've heard Joris speak on previous occasions, and I've been reading his work over the last couple of years. Joris works in the field of philosophy of education, and he's currently at Edinburgh University and was before that at the University of Leuven in Belgium. So I'm just going to hand you over to Joris Vlieghe. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, the title of my presentation this evening is Being Entirely Flesh, and you should take that very literally. I'm going to talk a lot about the body this evening. I guess that's the reason why I was invited here, because you're all involved in doing things with your body in an artful way, and therefore I would first like to say something about the interrelationship between corporeality, the human body, and art. And a lot of things I'm going to say about the body have direct political implications. And so, for a moment, I go back to the origins of Western philosophy and to the work of Plato, The Republic, which is, so to speak, the first blueprint of a society, one of the first people who thought about a recipe of how we should live well together, how we should organize our communal life, given the fact that we are all different people with different backgrounds and so on. And an interesting thing to see is that from the very beginning, when Plato makes this blueprint of the perfect society, the ideal society, he clearly states that artists have no place in this society. If this society should function well, the artists should stay out of this ideal city-state. Now, you can look at that in 2 ways. So a superficial account would be, so given Plato's philosophy, that he mistrusts the artist, because the artists gave wrong representations of reality, works of art, make us blind for true reality, and so on. Well, that might be a possible interpretation of why Plato is so adverse to artists, but perhaps a stronger account is that art is a very powerful medium. And my hypothesis is that Plato knows this very well himself, because he used to be a poet, or he had the ambition to become an artist himself, but he failed, and therefore he became a philosopher. It happens all the time. But you could say that he somehow knew the insurrectionary force that art has. Art is very dangerous. It can go against the powers that be. Now, why is that? Well, again, the first reason is that artistic practice might inspire people to think in new ways, different ways, to imagine a world that does not exist yet, and therefore art might be dangerous. But I think there's a more important reason, and this has to do with the body. I would say that artistic practice has the force to gather people around the work of art, around the performance, to gather them as bodies, and when they are gathered as bodies and share a common feeling, because they are inspired by the work of art, this is a very special thing that many politicians are afraid of. Around a work of art or around an artistic practice, a community can be shaped that has its own political agency. And my claim is that this political agency which resides in, that this political agency has to do that we are as bodies gathered around a work of art. Perhaps a point for further discussion is what does it mean that we are witnessing today an evolution towards digitization? Can we still have this feeling when we all sit at home behind our screens or not? So my point is that there is something in the bodies of people that is very dangerous, because it might communize people, it might bring them together, constitute an own feeling of community and even, I would say, equality. That's why I also coined the term democracy of the flesh. I will talk a lot about equality today. Of course, I am not saying that as bodies we are all the same. That's not my point. Just look around you. Body is a source of great difference between people. But, as I will try to make, I'll try to make clear, there are certain corporal experiences during which it doesn't matter who we are, in which it doesn't matter which social category we belong to, which ethnic category we belong to, and so on. So equality, in my definition, doesn't have to do with a factual equality, but with moments during which there is suspension of all social order. So in the sense that it doesn't matter who we are. Okay. In order to make my point, I have to say something about the way we usually approach the body in Western society. And I will tell you 3 stories. The first 2 stories are, I guess, quite familiar. And I will try to oppose a third, or to bring a third story that is opposed to those 2 familiar stories. So, the first story about the body, very well known, typically for Western society, is that there is a strong tendency, strong negative tendency vis-à-vis the body, which again goes back to the guy I was talking about, Plato, but which is also informed by Christian religion and so on. The idea that if we ask ourselves what is unique, what is essential, so what makes us properly human, we are inclined to say that we don't need the body to explain why we are unique, what's essential about humankind, and so on. It's the idea that my deepest self resides in the thoughts that I have, and these thoughts happen to be incarnated in a body, but this body essentially has nothing to do with who I am. Hence, a split between mind and body, famous mind-body dualism. It is moreover believed that the body hinders the full expression and the full realization of this deeper essence. The body is a nuisance. Body can become sick, so that I can no longer think, or the body makes that I feel hungry or gives me sexual appetite, things like that, which go against the expression of my deeper being. And therefore, we either don't take the body into account, but that's a bad idea because the body always returns, so it becomes the object of harsh disciplinary measures. In my own field, education studies, many people believe that the reason why you're now sitting in this way, in this particular setting, has to do with that, and that you're sitting on chairs which are not so comfortable and so on. It is a kind of disciplinary tool. Now, still according to the same story, this tendency to have a negative attitude vis-à-vis the body got intensified due to the success of modern science and medicine. And with modern, I mean starting from the 17th century. Because from the 17th century on, you get this kind of representations of the body. The body is seen as a kind of piece of machinery. It is seen as a machine, and it is treated like a machine. When it is discovered how out of which parts the body is constituted and how these parts work together, there is essentially no difference between the way in which a body works and the way in which, for instance, a steam engine works. And it is a kind of, it's a way of thinking that becomes very popular, and you could say that, for instance, Cubist painting might be related to that, the idea that you might fragment the human body and show that it can be built out of pieces and so on. And the idea is, if you look at the body in that way, you can also deal with the body in that way. And so from the 19th century on, all kinds of programs see the day of light, in which the body gets the object of discipline. Perhaps you might think that a course like physical education has always existed in the educational curriculum. Well, it's typically something that was invented in the 19th century. That was also the time that drill become, that was also the time that you had the first, typically these kinds of wars in which you needed troops of people that had to work together, and they had to be drilled. They had to learn how to march and so on. You might think that today this is all over, but this is not true. Because in the manuals which were used to train people to become a piece of machinery, to become a soldier who is willing to march and so on, it was prescribed that they had to march on a particular, that they had to learn to move on a particular rhythm. And the teacher had to blow on the whistle so that they had to move according to that rhythm. So that was something like that. It was 140 beats per minute, which is actually the same rhythm which is the rhythm of disco music. So you could say that even if we no longer are drilled in the army, what we do on the dance floor is still this kind of rhythm. And you could also say that the fascination for pornography in our culture, pornography also is fascinating, at least according to some authors, because the human body is precisely reduced to a kind of mechanical function. just look at the picture, I won't. Okay, so that was the first story. So the idea that there's a deep somatophobia, a fear for the body in Western culture, and that this goes together with the far-going instrumentalization of the body. The body is reduced to a kind of machinery and is put to use as a kind of machine. Over and against this tendency, starting in the 1960s, the body has been rediscovered and revalorized. In everyday life, as well as in philosophy and the social sciences. And some people even go so far to say that since the 60s, there has been a corporal turn. That's something typically for the social sciences that now and then you have a turn, like a linguistic turn, technological turn. Given moment, people talk about a corporal turn. Yeah. And a central figure in this retrieval of the body is a French philosopher who is still very popular today, a phenomenologist, who is called Maurice Merleau-Ponty. And he has discovered three things. So the first thing is that these so-called intellectual things that make us unique, or capacity for thought, capacity for abstraction, the non-corporal side of human existence, is in reality very much dependent upon our bodies. We can't have thoughts without our bodies. I can give a very simple illustration of that. Even the most abstract human endeavor, namely mathematics, is only possible thanks to an embodied relation towards the world. If you look at it from a purely mathematical point of view, the best thing to do is to count by numbers of 2, like computers do. So the best system would be a system with 2, 4, 8, 16 numbers. So you count up till 16 and then you start again. But most people in the West, but also in other cultures, count by 10. We count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then we start again. Well, why is it? This is so mathematically spoken, this is a very stupid thing to do. It would be much more efficient to count till 8 till 16. Well, the answer is very simple. It is because we have 10 fingers. So mathematics started as a very embodied practice, counting on one's fingers. So we can't devise a mathematics that is not related to our embodied practical relation to the world. That's his point. So even the most intellectual things are actually rooted in the body. Secondly, the body itself is a source of meaning. It has its own intentionality. So the things we thought that only the intellect was able of doing are actually characteristics of the human body. It makes sense, so Merleau-Ponty claims, to say that the body has knowledge. What he means by that is that I intuitively know, my body knows where the things are on the table. For instance, when I grab a pen, or when I type on the fingerboard, I can type without thoughts, but don't ask me to reproduce the order of the keys. I won't manage to do it. My body knows where the keys are. And it makes sense to say that the body knows where the keys are. And so, in sum, he goes so far to say that we are our bodies. We are identical with our bodies. So this is a view which is completely opposed to the first story. Nevertheless, I will tell yet another story, a third story, which is my own account, and which goes against the second story. It also goes against the first story. But I think that there is some deep truth in the first story. So what I'm trying to say is, at first sight, you could say, well, the first story is against the body, the second story is all in favor of the body. But my point is that things are more complicated than that. To be very clear on that point, I'm also all in favor of the body, but I think that the second story is not adequate. I will try to show that both at theoretical level, so the story of Merleau-Ponty, as well as at a practical level or everyday lives in the 21st century, the body is more absent than present. And I will also try to show that the first account of the body takes the body more seriously than, for instance, Merleau-Ponty does. Well, what's wrong with the second story? I would say two things. First of all, in a view like the one that Merleau-Ponty proposes, the body in the end is instrumentalized rather than being taken seriously for what it is itself. I can give you an example from my own background, so education studies. So in math education or in science education, the teacher also uses his or her body to make things clear to students. For instance, a biology teacher might explain how the heart functions by showing something like this, and that the heart works like a pump, and that you have parts that open and close again, and so on, a whole circuit. But students, during the exam, are asked to write their knowledge down using abstract terms and so on. They are not allowed to visualize the knowledge they have. So from a Merleau-Pontian point of view, you could say we should reform science education and give students the opportunity to use their bodies when they have to explain, for instance, biological concepts. That's all well, but if you look at this kind of articles, you see that in the end, that's my claim, the body is instrumentalized again, because the body is only taken serious in the sense that, oh my God, there is an interesting resource we have forgotten. No, we have to put it at work. So the body is only taken seriously as a kind of forgotten resource, and it's a wise thing to use it. So we are only interested in the body insofar as it can help us certain problems we already had. So the body is not taken seriously because of the body itself. And secondly, the significance of the body, and I think this is a more important point of criticism, the body is defined in the precise terms that were central to the traditional view of humankind. So the traditional view of humankind is, in essence, we are our mind has knowledge, our mind has intentionality, and so on. Well, now we discovered that there is also knowledge and intentionality in the body. Therefore, we start to love our body. But I would say this is not to take the body seriously for what it is itself. We only take the body serious, or only interested in those aspects of the body because we already thought that they were important as long as we define ourselves as rational beings, as beings interested in knowledge and so on. Or another way to say, when Merleau-Ponty says we have to go back to the pre-reflexive body. You can't spell pre-reflexive without reflexive. That would be another way of putting it. Okay, so that are theoretical problems I have with the so-called rediscovery of the body today. But perhaps more important, I also think that in our daily lives, the body is more absent than present. I will give you some illustrations. So the first thing is the obsession with health and fitness. I don't know whether you can see the pictures well. Yeah. So you can ask, my God, what are we doing in these fitness centra? Yeah. So if you just look at the particular movements that people perform, and you compare them with, in the 19th century, when we used animals in treadmills to generate energy. In the 19th century, nobody would say, well, let's take the dog out and we put a human being there. Of course not. But this is exactly what we are doing today. And you could say that this is actually very... So we invest a lot of energy. We do things that are completely insane in order to live a year longer or something like that. Perhaps this is a hypothesis I have that this results from a deep hatred for embodiment. Perhaps, I'm really serious about that, that love for human embodiment also entails that you accept that when you get older, the body becomes fatter and so on. A very nice illustration of that, by the way. But I will give you some other examples. Well, the second example is related to what I was saying. Is the ideal of the beautiful body. Alas, again, it's not me, but it's either a brownie or an anorectic body, but anyway, a kind of narcissistic attempt to fully master the body. But I can give other examples. So if you look into existing taboos around the body and why these taboos so persistently, why they, what is the word, they persist, yeah? Can you say that, yeah? Well, you could say that most of these taboos precisely have to do with those aspects of the body that we don't control, with the autonomous functioning of our bodies, and that somehow we have problems with the fact that the body has a will of its own, so to speak. So if you look at the things that are tabooed, we don't like to speak in public, for instance, about masturbation or menstruation. It's something we normally don't do. If I would start farting here, I'm sure that you would all think very funny things are happening here. I can assure you that nothing is as embarrassing for a teacher than when, for instance, in a classroom, he, by accident, has to burp, or when on a hot day, he gets or she gets stains of transpiration. These are all things that we try to suppress. All these things, I can give you many, many other examples, just use your own imagination. All these things have to do with the autonomous functioning of our bodies. It is as if we are ashamed to admit in public that we also inhabit a body that sweats, a body that has to shit, a body that has sexual desires and that therefore secretes sperm, and so on and so on. These are the things that are tabooed, and perhaps this precisely has to do that we don't like that dimension of the body. We welcome the dimension of the body in the sense that the body has its own intentionality or is a source of knowledge and so on, but the other part of the body is something that is still very much unspeakable. I will give you a last example. I'm sure that nobody here will agree with me, but I love this example. It's very radical. And it is why you have here the beautiful picture by Max Ernst. Baby Jesus is being spanked by the Holy Virgin, and you see his, how do you call that thing in English? Yeah, it has fallen down. It was really, it's really for some people today, still very scandalous to have this kind of pictures. Well, my point is that the aversion for corporal punishment points in the same direction. So this hatred for the autonomous working of our body. Just try to, or indulge me for a moment. Have patience. Why are we against corporal punishment? I can give you 1,000 good reasons to be in favor of corporal punishment. Just imagine that we might reintroduce corporal punishment. It would solve so many problems. I mean, the cost society has to put in organizing a system at prisons. We all know that people who are locked up for 5 years, they don't leave the prison as a better person. On the contrary, they get to know other people and they learn new criminal skills and so on. The shame the family has to endure every weekend they have to visit their parent in jail and so on. Why don't we just reintroduce corporal punishment? A thief gets 10, I don't know, fill it in yourself. What was it called in English? You beat someone with a stick, it's flogging, that's the word I was looking for. Yeah? Why don't we just reintroduce flogging? But I'm sure that most of you will say, no, it's unthinkable. Can't imagine reintroducing these barbaric practices. But perhaps this has to do with the fact that pain, corporal pain, is a very democratic emotion. It's a very direct feeling, and it really doesn't matter whether you are poor or rich or white or black or male or female or whatever distinction you want to make. Pain is pain. Pain is one of the most basic physical feelings. And perhaps our aversion for corporal punishment has exactly to do with that. That bodily pain has a kind of, it shows in a very direct way that this other part of the body makes us all equal. Let me go back to the other examples, the taboos I was talking about. You can see, so if you look at it from a sociological point of view, that the aversion towards farting, the aversion towards speaking about menstruation and all the other examples is higher in the higher levels of society than in the lower levels of society. Perhaps this has to do with the fact that the higher you are on the societal placed the higher you're placed in society, the more you have to suppress this other side of the body, because this other side of the body shows a kind of corporal equality, or what I would call democracy of the flesh. So to summarize it, and I think it's on the next slide, there is a dimension to our bodies that we cannot master, and that is on the other side of meaning. It is a part of our bodies that is not expressive. And it is exactly this other part, because it is not under our own intentional control, that makes us equal. Therefore, democracy of the flesh. So my point is, if we take the flesh seriously, I mean, if we take seriously that we fully are our bodies, then we also have to acknowledge that there is a kind of equality at the level of our bodies. That there is a democratic danger related to our bodies, and that we have a tendency to suppress it or to control it. And that the kind of societies, the kind of hierarchical societies, structured societies we live in can only work well, function well, if this part of the body is being controlled and suppressed. If it is set free, it means threat to the societal order, to any societal order. So I would say that the first story I told you, the mind-body dualism story, the instrumentalization of the body, even if I don't agree with it, has some truth in it, because it takes the body far more seriously. It's like Plato, who feared the artists, implicitly recognized that art is a very powerful tool that might upset society. So you could say that the mind-body dualism story at least acknowledges that there is a dangerous side to human corporeality. Now, how can we take all this further? Do I still have 10 minutes or? Yeah, okay, yeah. So I could stress more and more, a bit more that the confrontation with the autonomy of the flesh has a subversive power. And I could tell you other examples, but I'm not going to do that. You could also look at the moments during which we fully coincide with the corporal side of life, so which I call being entirely flesh. Examples of that are, for instance, when we are taken by a fit of laughter. I have done some research into laughter happening in classrooms. There's not a lot of research on that topic, but if you, I'm serious, yeah. But if you look at the research that exists, none of that research deals with laughter as a bodily phenomenon. It all deals with the things we laugh about, and then they give they give advice that a teacher should tell jokes or should not tell jokes, and so on. But they don't go into what laughter is as a heavily bodily reaction. So what does it mean when you are taken by a fit of laughter? It means that we lose all control over our body. We coincide with the bodily side of life. Our body functions autonomously. Our midriff, the musculature of our face, it starts to contract. We have no control over it. Our vocal cords start to contract. And we all start to make funny noises. And the thing is that we can't control it. So if you start to laugh, others will also start to laugh, even if they don't know what you're laughing at. It doesn't matter. Huh? It's even worse than that. And you even don't have to speak the same language. You don't have to share anything in common. And so we come to the same point, that laughing as a bodily phenomenon is a very equalizing phenomenon. There is a kind of equality that is installed in the phenomenon of communal laughter. Think again about the danger of laughing. I already mentioned that laughter usually is not something that we allow to happen in school, but it happens anyway. But for instance, it might happen in churches or, for instance, in a courtroom. Just imagine what would happen if the judge and the accused start laughing together. The whole hierarchical structure there is finished, and it will be very difficult to restore order. I can give other examples like being drunk, orgasm, lying together on the floor would be another, singing together, exhaustion, but also rhythmical, repetitive practices, and I will rest my case with the case of Swedish gymnastics. Perhaps you don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm talking about this. This was a very popular educational practice in the 19th century, and it remained common practice until the 60s in many European countries. It is called Swedish gymnastics because it was invented in Sweden by a guy called Ling. We still, although we don't have these practices anymore, we still have it's not called the furniture because then you think about IKEA, but how do you call it? The apparatus, yeah, is still present in many physical education contexts. Yeah, I would say that Swedish gymnastics is physical education in the most literal sense of the word. Because what students do is nothing but repeating over and over again the most essential movement forms. Like I said, since the 60s, it has been more and more replaced by other things. It is considered to be an obsolete practice, and more physical educational programs have become sport programs. Because sport obviously is much more interesting. It offers internal rewards that calisthenics don't have. It also has all practicing sport has all kinds of educational benefits. You learn to work together, you learn to work in a team, you learn to cope with winning and losing, and so on and so on. But then again, my answer to this would be, or my critical reaction to this evolution is, what does physical education has to do with the body? We accept physical education in school because it helps us to develop social skills, coping with winning and losing, and so on, and so on. In my view, physical education should be about the body as such. And I'm not holding here a plea to reintroduce Swedish gymnastics, but I'm sure that we could think about other things to do in physical education practice. And that we don't, I think it's a very bad idea to legitimize the existence of physical education because it's good for things that have nothing to do with the body. Of course, many people will immediately react, but don't you know that this kind of physical education, Swedish education, is the remains of a very belligerent past, and that it actually has been used as a kind of preparation for warfare. That recruits, so people who are going to become soldier had to do these practices, had to perform these practices, but you could formulate the opposite hypothesis, which you can actually find in a book I would advise you all to read by William McNeill, Keeping Together in Time, who rewrites the history of humankind, starting with the Homo neanderthalis, the cave people, and who tries to show that every great cultural invention has its origin in rhythmical practices, people who came together and did things together and had to make sure that they did the same thing at the same time. Like, for instance, marching. Of course, marching has been used afterwards for things that are very antithetical to human culture, like warfare. But his point is that these practices could only become a tool for warfare or a biopolitical tool, so making the body productive, because there is something in the body or in bodies when they move together, when bodies do the same thing at the same time, that has a specific force. And this force is appropriated in a kind of second moment. So in the first moment, there's a force in bodies that is used by regimes for warfare, or to maximize productivity, and so on. And so I come to my last slide. So what I'm trying to say today during my talk is that we should take seriously the body, and that this means that we take into account that there is a part of the body that is beyond meaning and intentional control. That there is I have tried to point to the possibility of an experience in which we are fully flesh, which means that we no longer control our body, or that as body we become part of a larger aggregate of bodies. I also tend to use the expression flesh to speak about that. And that we somehow are afraid of this kind of corporal experience because, like Spinoza famously said, we don't know what a body can do. We know very well what a mind can do, but we don't know what a body can do, what a body is capable of, and especially the body beyond control, and the body when it is part of an aggregate of bodies. Yeah, I will skip this part, but I will just finish by saying that, of course, due to certain political events, the Arab Spring, many political theorists have gained a new interest for the human body. So there's a reappraisal of what they call the multitude. And just imagine, well, it's not so clear, but people on Tahrir Square, for instance. I would fully endorse that, but these scholars don't take into account or don't appreciate the flesh rhythms and the value of collective repetition. I think that is also an important part. It's not only the fact that bodies come together or that bodies gather, but I would also say the fact that bodies do the same things at the same time, which was, I would say, the great invention or the great discovery behind the Swedish gymnastics I have talked about. I could say many more things, but I think I will, like I said, rest my case here. Okay. Thank you.